For a second. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. It's Tori. If this is your first time on my channel, I am a author and booktuber, and Imposter Syndrome is a monthly chat where we pull back the curtain on writing fantasy topics. I'm so borderline giddy about this panel right now. I'm so excited to have these three women with me on this chat. It's going to be awesome. Feel free at any point to drop questions in the comments. And with no further ado, Shauna, would you please kick us off with introductions?
Okay, well, hello everybody. My name is Shauna Lawless, and I am the author of The Children of Gods and Fighting Men, which is behind me here, which is a historical fantasy set in 10th century Ireland. It has two female protagonists. So whenever you invited me to come here and talk about females in fantasy, it was right up my street. So thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk with you.
Awesome. Krystle?
Hi, my name is Krystle Matar. I wrote Legacy of the Brainwash right there. Yeah, that's awesome. It's a Spiffbo finalist from last Spiffbo. And I have to admit, when you invited me on, it didn't click in my head that we were talking about writing women. I thought it was just about being women as writers. So when it clicked in my head, I felt super guilty for taking up this slot because my main character is male, and there's nothing that my imposter syndrome won't grab onto and tell me I don't belong here. But I decided that I'm going to stay anyway because I also write women because they are also people. So here I am.
Yes. Well, and I'm very glad you decided to stay because you do have some work to do. I just finished reading it, and I can attest to this. Quen?
Hi, I am Quenby Olson, and I'm the author of the fantasy books The Half-Killed and the Miss Percy Guide series, which both feature female protagonists and villains, actually, which I didn't set out with the intention to write that. Like, I'm going to write books that are very female-centric. It just happened that way. And then when I stepped back and realized it, I was like, oh, this is really nice. I like this. That, you know, everything is happening. All the cogs and things are turning because of all of these women doing things and things happening. So that was really nice to discover without even realizing it.
Yeah. Well, and Quen, you are also a Spiffbo finalist, and that is awesome. Congratulations for that. 8, we're on 8, right? Yes. 8-ish. Yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah, so that's awesome. So my goal for this chat, as I kind of mentioned to you guys in the email, was this is a conversation that seems to be happening in a lot of pockets of fantasy all over the place. And, you know, obviously it's a very important one. And, you know, to speak to your comment, Krystle, I think there might be a couple moments in here where we do delve into being female writers of the genre as well, because I think that those two things definitely go together. So yeah, my first question to kind of as just a super basic icebreaker is I would love to know a or multiple female characters that you guys have really loved within fantasy and what series / book they are from. I'm going to do the hard questions first. And anybody in the comments, feel free to post favorite female characters because I'm sure that will spur some remembrance on our part too. I'll give you guys a quick second to think about it. I know that one that really, as a tomboy, I got really tired of reading about how there were all these female characters who were very like girly and romantic leads and all this kind of stuff, and I just didn't really find myself anywhere. And then I remember reading Malazan Book of the Fallen and Song of Ice and Fire, and I found Brienne of Tarth, who is one of my favorite fantasy characters of all time. And I was like, oh, she exists. She was one that really stuck out to me as just something different that I was really excited to see, and she was so nuanced and interesting, and and I feel like it's really opening up. So this coming year, I anticipate adding a lot of names to my list of female fantasy characters. But she was one that has always really stuck out to me.
Yeah, I think George R.R. Martin, he writes good female characters, and it's obvious because he has so many. You know, female protagonists, and they all have to be different. So, you know, you get well-defined characters. You know, Catelyn Stark is very different to Arya Stark, who's very different to Cersei, to Brienne, to, you know, Sansa. You know, there's so many different characters, and I think that's what you want. You want characters with depth, and to not always be the romantic lead, or to kind of be the person that gets fridged in chapter 2 and dies, and sort of starts the hero on his quest of vengeance. So yes, George obviously is kind of top tier. I think Mark Lawrence writes good female characters. I think like Red Sister, Grey Sister, Holy Sister, that trilogy is excellent for his female characters. I'm trying to think who else I have read recently that has had really good female fantasy characters. John Gwynne, I really like his female characters. I don't know if any of you have read his new trilogy, the Bloodsworn trilogy.
I've heard great things about Orca.
Yes, I was just about to say, if you love Brienne, you will love Orca. That's a really good shout out for you. I think you would really enjoy that series.
Yeah.
Brian Stavley, I don't know. Brian Stavley writes really good characters. His main cast are like they're like real warriors. But the world doesn't discriminate men or women as warriors. So, but the training is like kills people. It's so hard. So the people that survive are hard as nails, and so his main 3 people in those books. One is Valen, but one is Gwenna, and she. I love her. I want her to stand on my throat. You know, like she's amazing. She was such a good character. And then I think his new book, she was a side character in those, but she was such a crowd pleaser that his newest book is hers. So I'm really excited to read it. And then N.K. Jemisin, her main character is a mother who is deeply flawed, and kind of grappling with what it means to be a mother in a world that is not kind. And so that was a really good trilogy. And somebody you may know, Quenby Olson, wrote this amazing character named Miss Percy, who is grappling with being a woman in a situation where she isn't seen at all as a person. And that book I just finished recently, as you might be able to tell, and it really lives kind of inside me still. So I think those 3 would be my top choices.
I've heard great things.
Oh, is it my turn now?
It
is. Okay. Sorry for the voice.
You're fine.
I think the female characters that really stuck with me were ones that I read when I was in my teens. And I think the majority of those were from Robin McKinley. So The Hero in the Crown and The Blue Sword. I remember The Hero in the Crown especially. I remember it was Aaron was the character's name. And it was just, here was this, she wasn't to be rescued. She was going to fight, and she had the sword. She went and did everything And so it wasn't, you know, Sleeping Beauty waiting for the prince to save her. It wasn't Snow White in the glass coffin waiting for the prince to come and kiss her awake. It was this girl who was about the age I was when I was reading it, going off and fighting the dragon and going through the training and doing all of that. And I just remember thinking, oh, this is such a neat thing to see, because it's always been Arthur and the knights, and it's always been the men going off while the women are just kind of these little off to the side. Oh, go have fun fighting, honey, you know. And so, but to get hit with that when I was at a younger age, and I think that really did turn what I wanted to see in fantasy and what I wanted to expect from fantasy. You know, it made me want that more and made me really look for it and become very aware of it.
Yeah. Kind of, I mean, we kind of touched on this a little bit. I'd be curious to know, like, we've kind of mentioned you guys all have female characters and protagonists in your stories. How did you, like, characters design is such a interesting topic to me because everybody approaches it differently and stuff, but how did you guys go about building the female characters in your novels? Quen, do you want to start us off with Miss Percy? It was because she's a spinster that inherits a dragon egg,
yes.
correct? That
yes.
I'm sold. Like, I cannot wait to read it. I'm so excited.
I love that you've asked the person who does not plot or outline at all. How did you build your characters?
I don't either.
I don't know. I just started writing stuff till it sounded cool. No, it's. I will say I've always loved The Hobbit because it starts out and Bilbo is, I think, fairly in Hobbit years, kind of middle-aged when he goes off on his adventure. And I always liked that, read it to my kids a dozen times and thought, what would that kind of be like if there was a female version of Bilbo who is reluctant to go off on this adventure, and, you know, she has aches and pains and she just kind of wants to stay home and all of this. What happens when it's the female version? You know, because at least a male version of a middle-aged character you can see going off and having an adventure. You just think, oh, he's a little older. But a female middle-aged character, you don't see. Usually once women hit middle-aged, it's like, okay, you kind of slide off into the sunset now, and we leave it for the pretty young women. And so I really wanted to explore that. You know, here's this woman who she's having an occasional hot flash and, you know, things like that. And yet she has to go off, you know, things hurt, her hips hurt, she's tired, you know, she's not this svelte, thin young thing. She's, you know, she's lived a bit. And I really wanted to explore that and see that in a fantasy novel. Someone who seems like so many of us, suddenly now, boom, now you're experiencing a fantasy world.
Yeah. I heard, Shauna, one of your protagonists referred to as an Irish Cersei Lannister.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about this.
Yes, I think the brothers Gwyn have said that about my character Gormla. So my book's historical fantasy. So Gormla exists. She's a real person from history. And there are some historical documents that have discussed her life and they judge her very harshly. She is a schemer. She's a wicked stepmother. She provokes a war. So she's kind of encompasses all these nasty traits that historical female characters are often given. And so whenever I was researching her, initially I thought to kind of do a novel from her perspective where she wasn't the bad guy. You know, she wasn't ambitious and she wasn't like a warmonger, and to be a more sympathetic character. And then the more I thought about it, kind of when you look at history and you look at male characters from that time, if they're ambitious or if they're warmongers or if they want land and they're fighting, they're the heroes. So why, if you're a female and you have those same characteristics are you the bad guy? You know, it's the same characteristics, it's just a female embodies it instead of a man.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I just thought, no, do you know what? I'm going to make her worse than the history has described her. She's going to be really scheming, really conniving, like wants power for her and her son, and will stop at nothing to get it. But I didn't want to make her, again, you know, that can be like a mustache twirling evil villain. I didn't want her to be like that either, because you know, well, why would she be like this? You know, why does she want to have power? Why does she, you know, why is she ambitious? And, you know, if you look in the 10th century in Ireland, you know, she's married off multiple times. She is living through a time of war and strife. And it kind of made sense for her to be like that, because ultimately she's trying to save herself as opposed to wait for all these men and kings around her to decide what they're going to do. So I didn't want to make her evil. I just wanted to make her have those characteristics and to kind of own them, for lack of a better word, not to be ashamed of having those characteristics of ambition, of, you know, to be scheming and conniving. And then to counter that, my other female protagonist, she is strong too, but she probably has different types of strengths. So the strengths I wanted to discuss with Fola was the strength of being a mother, of being somebody who cares for your family, and the emotional burden of being strong. You know, when you're caring for lots of people and you're trying to make everyone else happy, that requires incredible strength and selflessness, and it's a different type of strength that sometimes doesn't get discussed at all in fantasy. You know, there's a lot of warriors and there's a lot of female, like, damsels in distress or feisty princesses, but actually being a mother is often like, that's the boring part of womanhood, and that doesn't ever make it to the page. So I really wanted to have a strong mother type character as well, and so that the two women would be facing very similar circumstances, but they're dealing with it in completely different ways.
Yeah. Krystle, I, having just finished Legacy of the Whitewash, like literally a week ago-ish, I was really, one of the things I was really impressed that I'm hoping you can speak to is Stella is not just a romantic lead female, but she has such a history behind her. And that was one thing that I really appreciated about her through the book. And I loved that you, again, used that kind of image of motherhood with her and Saradwin, and how, like, there's two female characters there that I just absolutely loved through the whole book. So please tell us more.
Yeah, so I'm on the same page as you, Shauna, and also Quen, where, you know, women are capable of being more than just dust that we sweep aside after a certain age. And Stella, when I started writing her, she was quite a bit older than me, but it's been so long now that I'm catching up with her. And she was a love interest first as I was writing her, because I felt it was time for Tashoy to kind of grow up and learn love. So when I was trying to figure out how this connection would happen, I realized pretty early in the process that it would take another parent to see him, what he's going through. And also myself as a parent, I know what it's like to be, you know, trying to raise a child and struggling and being alone and, you know, all of that. And so I poured a lot of that into her. Just that desire to be seen when your life revolves around basically somebody else. And it's a wonderful part of our lives, but it's hard. And if you're not with the father, it's very isolating, and, you know, all of these layers. And so when I started writing her, all of these things just came to the surface pretty naturally for her, just because I understood her. And so to me, when people ask me how I write female characters, I kind of don't have an answer, because they're people first.
Right.
And then, you know, by understanding them as people, they come to life for me. So yeah, that's Stella. But then also Ilya, I'm also on the same page as you, Shauna, where a desire for power and ambition and, you know, maybe a sex life do not a villain make in a man. And so why do they make villains in women? And so Ilya is my conversation with that trend in science fiction and fantasy, where she got to where she is partially because her family is powerful, but also because she wants to keep that power and build that power, and grow in a society that is a little bit different than ours. But I couldn't get rid of all of the barriers just because they're so ingrained into my head that I had to fight against them. But those barriers can sometimes make really interesting discussions. So I didn't get rid of them completely. So she's facing certain things where people look at her differently because she's a woman and she's beautiful and she's desirable. And so, but she's more than that. And she's dangerous, but she's not a villain per se. So it's been really, it's hard to talk about her too much because it'll be spoilers for in the series, but it's been really fun to kind of have a conversation with that dichotomy that we have as a genre, where the men who want these things are the heroes. And so having men who want these things be the villains against what's going on has been a lot of fun, just to kind of flip that very quietly on its head.
Yeah. Well, and something I thought was interesting with that I can speak to because I've read the book is I really enjoyed there were a few similar threads between Ilya and Ishmael.
Yep.
And both of them made me want to cover my ankles. So it was kind of a fun, like, I was, that there was a similarity there, I think kind of plays well to, I think, maybe what you were trying to accomplish with that.
Yeah, well, both of them use their sexuality as like a shield to deflect people from seeing who they are and what they're capable of. And it's interesting to me how people react to both of them, where Ishmael is quite universally loved. Ilya is not. And they're not all that different. And I mean, I get it. I did it on purpose. It's not a gotcha, I'm not, blaming readers, but it's just an interesting thing that happens as we interact with the text, where we don't even realize the biases that we're carrying when we're reading, and an author who's aware of them can use them. And it's been fun seeing the fruits of that.
Yeah. I'm really, so my book Phased, I have two young protagonist sisters as the main characters. And that started off with me being just very frustrated with YA supernatural toxic romance books. And they were everywhere all the time. And I wanted to use the fact that the main characters are werewolves, which is a very normal supernatural trope, to talk about a lot of deeper themes. And the reason that I really enjoyed working with two sisters in the book is because they're kind of a exploration of how two people can go through a very similar traumatic experience and cope with it in completely different ways. And I think, like, as I got into the story more and really started, embodying both of the characters at the same time, it became very interesting and educational for me to figure out, okay, how are they responding to this same event? How is it affecting them? And how are they, you know, where do they have conflicts because they have different coping mechanisms and stuff? And I think, you know, all of what we've said about these characters kind of, to me, goes back to, I think oftentimes female characters can get very one note. And if there are multiple female characters in a story, they all kind of feel the same. Yep. And if you just look at the characters we've mentioned from our own books, there's such an incredible variety of people in general. And why are women different? You know, like why would we treat that any differently? I am going to grab a couple of comments quick before we go on. I've heard of Nineveh books, but I am not familiar with who wrote them or anything. So
that'll be the Wheel of Time.
But I'm not familiar with them. Yeah. I've heard the name before, so I know of it. Tarma and Kethri from which series?
That one I don't know.
I don't either. Miss Percy's dragons are a little different than Smog. I'm very excited to read that. I think, you know, that I've noticed a lot of people talking about, like, we really are starting to see a lot of the, like, middle-aged kind of has been through war and is just trying to have a nice quiet life warriors in books now, which I've been really enjoying. And I love, Quen, that you're kind of dipping into that on the female side of, like, you know what, we're not all like going to be the socialite at age 20 and that's who the book is about. Like, you know, who's on the other side of that. And I think it's a great push for us as writers to find the unseen characters, if that makes sense.
I mean, for me, it was especially personal because right before I started writing it, I started getting really sick and I couldn't figure out why I was getting sick and what was going on. And it turned out that after I'd had my last baby, it pushed me really hard into early menopause. And there's this kind of feeling in the world that once you hit menopause, you know, you can no longer have children. So basically, what use are you as a woman? Because, well, you're done now. Because there's so much in the medical industry pushing towards pregnancy and childbirth. But once you are phasing out of that, it's like, oh, well, you're just turning into an old lady now. That's fine. Go away. So I think that's kind of the mindset a little bit that Miss Percy, that Mildred has, is that, you know, she's reached that point. Well, you know, you're no good to anyone. You're not going to get married and have children. You're beyond that. So you're just kind of like a piece of furniture now. This is how society will treat you. You're no use. And so I think I wrote that because I almost had this, I don't know, maybe it was a midlife crisis, this fear that, like, okay, I've had my kids and what more is there that I have? You know, what else can I do? Am I just going to raise my kids and give them all of my energy and then just kind of, you know, diminish and go into the West? You know, that's it. So I wanted to, you know, I imagined having an adventure. Like, what if I could still have an adventure? What if women my age think their bodies kind of changing now, they're going through this horrifying reverse puberty, that, you know, you can still go off and try something new and have a new chapter of your life open up.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of going along with that, I wanted to bring up female character archetypes that we see a lot in fantasy, and whether we think they are a good archetype or overused or anything like that. Because I know we kind of touched on the one of the ones that came up in the original chat that I had was the busty barmaid. And the kind of character that, like, exists for one specific purpose, and she's kind of like on the side as all of the actual heroes come through, and it's a very kind of one note archetype. And I think thankfully we're kind of seeing less of that now, but I'd be curious. That's a pretty extreme one, but I'd be curious to know if there's any archetypes or specific character types that you feel like are just overdone in fantasy right now.
I think sort of feisty, overly sassy assassin who runs around in 5-inch heels, and you know, whenever I come across that character, I can't cope. Go put some trainers on, take your shoes off. Yeah, I've seen a lot of that character. It just reminds me. Did you ever watch the new Jurassic World?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly where you're going with this.
I know it. I know what you're talking about too.
Yeah. So Claire is, obviously there's dinosaurs and genetically modified dinosaurs, but the most unbelievable thing about the movie is that Claire is running away from them all in high heels, and it's, yeah. I can't cope. Like, you can't run in
if
heels.
you're wearing heels when the dinosaurs attack, that's fine. Take them off.
That's my favorite, when writers and movie makers are aware of that, and they give you the moment, the really satisfying moment where it's like they're about to run for their life and the girl does take off her heels and books it, and it's like, yes, I like that out as a conversation with a weird trope that we have. So I think that's a good moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that really, that annoys me.
I actually had that exact discussion with my husband because I watched Jurassic Park for the first time last year and Jurassic World this year. And I remember my favorite female character in that entire show is Mama T-Rex. I will die on the hill that she is the coolest character in that franchise all day.
I think for me, the female characters that we see again and again are the wives and mothers that are left behind. You'll maybe see them for like one chapter at the beginning, and then the hero is like, oh no, I have to leave my wife and my child, and I'm going to go off and have my adventure. And then you never see them again for the rest of the book, except for the hero thinking, boy, I can't wait to get back to my wife, and that's it. They're just kind of there as this object or possession for the hero to get back to. Mm-hmm. And we have no idea what they're enduring while their husband is gone. Who knows what they're dealing with. And it's just, they're just kind of there in stasis, like they're frozen, waiting for their husband to come back. Mm-hmm. And I get tired of that. Sometimes it's like that there has to be more. You can't just have them be like you're leaving your car behind or something. Like, you have to, I wish that I wish that there was something more to that, and it wasn't just like, oh gosh, my favorite t-shirt. That's about how personal it feels, because they just disappear then for 900 pages and there's nothing, and then they come back and everything's fine. Oh, my wife is still here. That's great. The end. And I really wish that
sounds like
I really wish that was
right. Quen is what happens when he leaves, and write her story back at the
the whole story is what she has to deal with, being
especially
now the single
war going on. He's gone off to fight the war, but that means that at home is still dangerous.
He's having to defend the homestead now. You know what I mean? It's not like everything's fine. Well, let me just go out and feed the chickens and wait for my man to come back. It's
strange because I'm a multi-genre reader, and there are so many books that take place in approximately World War II about the women left behind and all of the incredible things that they did while the men were off in Europe fighting. Leading rebellion in the street, and dealing with rationing and all of that. And for some reason that trend has completely missed science fiction and fantasy, and I feel like those would be really interesting books. I would read those companions to SFF for sure. Mm-hmm. And then my answer for the trope that I'm tired of, I'm not sure if it pops up as much in fantasy, but as I said, I'm all over the place with genres. And in cop fiction and crime fiction especially, you get the wife who's the nag. And I hate that character so much. I hate that that's the only way for a woman to exist in some people's books, where they've written this man who's kicking ass and taking names and building a crime empire and all of this stuff. And the woman is sitting at home nagging at him about, you're not home, you're not here, you're too evil, I hate this. And it's like, she knows who she married. Why can't she help him be awesome or evil, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That character always drives me nuts. And I'll watch really popular movies and series if they give it too much, because it just feels so. Why can't we be more? Like, why can't we also have ambition? And why is she the conscience or whatever, when she could also be the hero or the anti-hero? So that's my 2-part rant.
Yeah. I think too, like, you know, Shauna, you were talking a little bit too about female villains. And I think that's, I will say, you know, Andrew mentioning that there's a shift happening where a lot more females are heroes. And I think that's definitely true in fantasy right now. But I think too, like, I get excited when I see a really nuanced female villain. Yeah. So this is real mom life, everybody. Yeah, but that, you know, kind of like you were talking about, when we have female villains within a story, and how do we make them really nuanced and really interesting, and pull out that, like, what is their ambition and what are they trying, what is the heart of what they're trying to get to? And it's okay if they are a villain too.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are afraid to make females villains.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm with you right there, because it's like, you know, men get these really fascinating stories of their descent into the life of crime, or their, you know, their pursuit of a throne that doesn't belong to them, and so on and so forth. We can do that too. We can team up with the guy that we married, and we can lift him and he can lift us, you know. And it, like, I like power couple, the power couple trope where they're both bad or heroic together. And I'm a grimdark writer, so that's why I keep saying that instead of but when they're together doing the things that people are telling stories about, instead of her being an object in a bag of holding, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's cool because I think people are starting to explore so many different types of relationships. You've got, you know, like sister bonds. You've got, you know, I'm a massive platonic friendship fan. I love seeing, you know, just any kind of platonic relationship in fantasy where it's a pair of friends that do something, or sisters, you know, whatever. And I think there's a lot of places of that are really starting to be dug into a little bit more, which makes me really excited, because I love a good platonic relationship any day. And you kind of see that with I'm trying to think what I've read recently that kind of has that. There's a great Wistful Ascending by JCM Byrne. His main character is this, you know, superhero that's trying to stay away from his past and have a more peaceful life. And he has his closest friend is a security officer, female character, and they're banter, and they're just like, they're sparring partners, and they banter. And it was just, I loved it. It was so much fun to see that being really leaned into, and exploring all the different types of relationships that characters can have within the books. So yeah, I do think that that's the fun part, is that people, it seems like fantasy is really starting to expand like crazy, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I sort of think that when we talk about tropes that we see, sometimes I find, obviously, women in books exist to make the main character who's male look better, you know, so of course then she has to fancy him or be romantically involved with him. And then I found for a while we sort of moved to, so writers wanted to have like a female character, so then she was like a pedestal woman, which is what I would say, and then so they're perfect, you know, they have no flaws, they are, you know, beautiful, clever, strong, you know, everything that they say is right all the time. And then that's not quite right either, because both those characters are two-dimensional if they are done, you know, to that sort of extreme. And so I've found recently there's so much better developed female characters where, you know, everyone's sort of more in the middle. You know, there's friendship characters, you know, because the male characters' identities don't exist on having female characters worship them. Mm-hmm. And then there, you know, you can have friendships because, you know, not the women doesn't have to be perfect. They can have conversations. They can have other things to do in the story. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really loving that. I'm loving seeing more three-dimensional women who feel more real life. Like I feel like I'm reading more books and I'm like, I know people like this. And even though it's fantasy and they're in fantastical worlds and there's dragons or orcs or whatever and magical things going on, the people feel really authentic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember in college, I had a friend who had written a partial story as her English capstone project. And one of the professors, who I personally was not a major fan of for other reasons, also was like, so this is great, but this platonic relationship you have between this male and female character is just unrealistic, because in reality, that wouldn't happen. It would have to turn into more than that. And I've never forgotten that, because I was like, that sounds like the biggest challenge ever, because I'm sure we all do. We all have friendships with I just thought that was so interesting that she was like, you can't have platonic relationships with a female involved in fantasy or in any genre, from what she was saying. And it was like, how did we get to that set? You know, where did that happen? Yeah, I just saw who said that, Melissa. Yes, please. Female Sherlock Holmes sounds absolutely amazing. Joao says, really like the character of Gemma Teller in Sons of Anarchy, who sort of filled that role. I haven't seen the show, but I've heard a lot of things about it.
Yeah, she was a good character. Mm-hmm. She was a bit of a schemer as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that I'm going to play with a little bit in my current work in progress is I have a strong warrior female character and her mother, their relationship through the story, because her mother is the hearth and home like anchor in their family, and something happens where that gets thrown into complete jeopardy, and it's one of those like should be left behind moments, but I'm subverting that intentionally, because I want to, what happens when the one who like maybe should be left behind isn't, and how that changes the relationship. And because there's so much, again, nuance to that I think we can draw from, that's really interesting. And as a writer, I'm really excited to get to that part, because it's just more interesting to write about. What was my next question? I have my list and I'm like totally off right now, because we went in a completely different direction, which was great. I want to talk a little bit about, because all four of us are moms. So I want to talk a little bit about motherhood and fantasy. We've kind of touched on it a little bit. Oh, thank you, Joelle. In fairness, I did cheat a little bit, because I did listen to an interview with you a couple of days ago. So I heard someone say I think you even said your name. So, but thank you. I'm glad I got it right. I try to get people's names right. Yeah, motherhood, I think too, like what are some of the ways that we can use motherhood and fantasy to add to the story? And I think that's a, explosive amount of answers, but I'd love to kind of dive into that a little bit. Quen, who's mom lifing over there like a boss.
I think, I had to think about this, but being a mother, it really changes your priorities a lot. And I think it makes you really have to step back and put things in a perspective of, you know, if you're having a young hero and she's going off and she's saving the world, and usually there's nothing weighing her down. It's just her. She's running off. Maybe she'll have a cute relationship at some point in the story, la la la. And when you're a mother, then suddenly it's like, yes, I want to save the world and I want the world to be a better place. But yet right here, I have this own little universe around me with all these little planets orbiting around me that I have to think about right now, you know. And I think I really like, I think, you know, when Caitlin Stark was mentioned, that it was a similar, you know, there she is, she can see the world, Westeros and all of that crumbling, and yet at the same time she's a mother and she has her children. So there was that constant balance of, I want to save my children, but yet also, if everything around here turns to garbage, then what's the point of saving them individually if the world that they're in is collapsing? So there's such a dual, there's multiple layers then suddenly when you add in motherhood. You know, what in the immediate moment is more important for you to fight for. So I think that's something that I really like to see explored, and I do like it when I see it. I love it when I see it, because that's something I think about all the time. You know, what would I be willing to do and give up for my kids? You know, they talk, you know, we talk about climate change, we talk about all these different things, and it's like in the immediacy of the moment, you know, what am I doing here at home for my family, and then for the world at large? There's that constant balance that I have to tread.
Yeah, I remember, I want to say recently, but I think it was a long time ago, the conversation about more mothers in fantasy started, and some writers, a lot of them were new mothers themselves, were talking about how impractical it was to write, you know, an adventure from the point of view of a mother, because, you know, they're listing off all these reasons that toddlers are hard to take on adventures with you. And to me, all of those things were just making an interesting story, you know, and they were trying to say that it wasn't practical as a, you know, a storytelling device, but these stories that we're telling, they're not necessarily supposed to be easy for the people that we're telling them about. And so, you know, trying to save the world, but you've also got to figure out when your 3-year-old can nap, is an interesting story, because it's hard. And the fact is that, you know, those of us that have less comfortable lives are balancing this daily. And, you know, just from my family's background, my great grandmother, I don't have pictures of her up anymore, but she was a nurse during the Second World War, and she had my grandmother while her husband was away. He didn't meet my grandmother until she was 2 years old. And at around the time that she was a year old, my great grandmother was considering enlisting because she was a nurse and she could go help, thereby leaving my grandmother behind. And it was devastating for her, but she was writing to her husband, who was talking about the men who were dying, and she was thinking, I could help. And she battled with it for a really long time, and then the war ended and the decision was over for her. But that's interesting. That's a very human story, and there are so many stories like that in real life. And so to say that we are incapable of making these decisions and that it is unpractical for us to consider these things it's untrue. It simply isn't true. And I understand why they felt that, because perhaps they felt their lives were uninteresting and they couldn't imagine themselves as protagonists because their lives were being taken up by trying to survive toddlers. But they wouldn't feel uninteresting if there were more stories about mothers. And so it becomes a loop that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where we tell ourselves that these stories aren't interesting. We don't write them. They never exist. We never discover them. And so we tell ourselves that we're uninteresting. And it's not true. We are interesting and we are complicated. And the act of being a parent does not remove us. It makes us an impractical protagonist. But there are some, like Quen said, incredible layers to every decision now that character-driven story really profound, I think.
Yeah.
I think too, I'm just going to quick add something to what you said. There's also the issue with, you know, the stories about mothers. I think there's that whole issue with once a woman becomes a mother, it's almost as if she takes on a mantle that's all she is, that she ceases to be a person. She is now a mother. You are no longer what you formerly were. You are now this caretaker, and that is it, as if you have lost all sense of your former self now that you are a mother. And I think that's something that we have to battle with, is that, you know, you yourself no longer exist. You are now, you know, Krystle, the mother. You are now Quenby, the mother. You know, it's just the person you were before it's gone. And that's always something to fight against. That, you know, we're still here, but just with kids attached, you know.
Clinging. Yeah.
I also, if I think about mothers as well, and I find this in not just fantasy, in lots of genres, mothers in fantasy or in fiction tend to be mothers of babies. And actually, you know, when you're a mother forever. And, you know, and I know, because I've a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old, and I know obviously we talk a lot about how difficult it can be to be a mother of babies. You know, you're breastfeeding and you can't sleep, and toddlers and teething, and there's all these things. But actually being a mother of older children has challenges too. More emotional support than physical, obviously. But I think that doesn't really get discussed a lot in literature. And that's something that is sort of a theme that I'll be using in my stories. And it's the mental load of being a mother and the mental strength sometimes you need to have, because it's not just your own happiness or your own life that you're considering. It's 4 people's, it's 5 people's, or, you know, and everyone's sadness as a mother. Well, in my case, like, I find, you know, I absorb all my children's, and if they are not happy, I am not happy. And so there's a lot more of that to being a mother than just, I don't know, like breastfeeding, which I find gets a lot of, you know, that's fine that it gets featured, because that obviously is something that happens, but it's just, being a mother just doesn't end with babies. And I think that's important to include in fantasy as well.
Yeah, well, and I think since we've brought her up so much, she can just be the mascot for this chat. Catelyn Stark being, you know, having been through all of that phase of having her children be these babies that it was just them, you know, that phase where it's just you and this tiny little human, and it's like horrible and wonderful and all of the things, and you don't sleep, and they're the cutest thing ever, and like all of the things. And now she is on the opposite side of that. She's looking back, and most of her children are now adults out in the world, or at least half of them. And she still wants to protect them and still wants to have that emotional connection with them. But some of them are like in a completely different part of the country, and she has no control over what is happening to them to as much of a degree as she wants. And again, like you said, there's so many. I mean, I'm dealing with that relationship I mentioned before in my work in progress right now is a mother of adult warrior children. And like, you know, and all of that kind of as a completely separate, like, how does she let them go out on these raids knowing like they might, you know, anytime they could just not come back? And how do you like balance that as a mother? And there's such a huge range in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it is a good point, because a lot of the fantasy books that I have read, it's young mothers, which also totally agree. Like, show the whole gambit. Like, you just put them all in there. And yeah, I think now that we're kind of talking about the mothers of older children, I think the Queen Dowager character is an archetype that we do see more of, I would say. But like, what about when she's not just the queen, you know, like outside of royalty? I think there's less of that often in fantasy.
It's middle-aged women, I think, find it difficult. You know, where are they? So the Dowager Queen's interesting because, you know, she can be kind of mean and sassy and not like anybody and say what she thinks.
Maggie Smith in Downton Abbey.
Yeah. Or the Queen of Thorns in the Game of Thrones, or, you know, they're young. So it's middle age is a bit of an invisible age group, which is why Miss Percy sounds so fabulous.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah. Because it's an age that just sort of gets lost, and it shouldn't get lost, you know, because women of that age are doing incredible things, and, you know, but yeah, you know, if they're not deemed, I suppose, physically desirable, they seem to lose their place in literature, and that should not be the case.
Yeah. I think all of that kind of points to like writing human experience in general.
Yeah.
And how I think a lot of people don't go deep enough with it, and they don't really dig into the motives and the fears and all of the things that their characters represent in the story, where, you know, push it farther. Like, what more can you discover about your character, and what threads does that pull on from the world around them?
Yeah.
I
definitely think it's improving, though. And I think, you know, like all writers, you know, male or female, if they think about the females in their life, you know, their mothers, their sisters, their aunts, they're all important to them, you know. So why do they disappear in fiction? And I think with probably Game of Thrones being sort of a really popular piece of fantasy literature, it obviously was popular as a series, but more so because of the TV series, is that it was good because it showcased characters, male and female, across all age groups, and in so many different situations, and having different sort of lifestyles. And that's been fabulous, I think, for making people think, yeah, you know, there are other characters that we can have in our books that are interesting, and people will read them, you know. People are looking for something new, I think.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, talking about the variety is a good point, just for, you know, when I'm a big Motley Crue fan, and one of the things I love about Motley Crue is you got a group of people, sometimes friends, sometimes frenemies, sometimes we're working together because we have to, you know. But what's so fun about that is the contrast of the different personality types and the different, you know, backgrounds, what they're coming from, and the different skill sets they all bring to the table. And that's one of the reasons I love reading Motley Crue, because there's just there's so much packed into a small group of people. And I try to kind of keep that in mind whenever I'm writing. Is just, how do I contrast? If I have this character, okay, what's the opposite of that, and what's the contrast to this, and how can I bother this character with somebody else's stuff? And, you know, so yeah, I think it's important to have that. Like you said, the variety is really important, regardless of what kind of characters you're writing. Centerby asks, why aren't there more fantasy mysteries? I mean, Krystle, yours kind of has a mystery vein in there.
I put it in the chat. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, awesome.
Brightwash was kind of my love letter to all of the genres that I like to read, and so that's why the cop mystery came in a little bit, and then of course, fantasy, and also the romance I felt was, you know, something I couldn't leave behind. And then it wasn't that strong at first, but then I met some superstars like Quenby, who, by being brave, inspired me to also chase that instead of pretending it doesn't exist. which is why, you know, it's so important for us, I think, to take these leaps and push these boundaries, because you never know what people are looking for when they come to us to read. And, you know, if it's something that's meaningful to us as the writers, it's probably going to be meaningful to somebody else who's living through something similar as the readers. And, you know, Quen's books are romance, and Miss Percy is kind of cozy, and the stakes are lower, but that doesn't make it any less profound in what Quen was able to say. And so things that we dismiss in ourselves, tying back to imposter syndrome, it's easy to tell ourselves that these things that we're craving or wanting to say are frivolous, but they aren't. They really aren't, because it's part of the human experience. And by putting it out there, it makes other people feel less alone in their complicated human experience.
Yeah. I'm actually really glad you brought that up, Krystle, because that was a tweet that Quen had in the last week or two, I think, where you were talking about that comedy or more lighthearted fantasy isn't less than just because it is those things. And I think that was such a like amazing, like, hey, this is a good reminder, because I think a lot of people do have that kind of a mindset about it. But when you think, like what Krystle just said, there's so many different ways that we can empathize with each other, and people need different things at different times. I don't read big, heavy, I like military and dark fantasy, but that's not what I read all the time, because there are so many moments where I need something else. And the war and military is just not gonna do good things for me in that moment. And I need something where, you know, a spinster inherits a dragon egg and goes on an adventure. And that's going to be exactly what I need at that moment. And that makes it valuable. So, yeah, I don't know if you guys wanted to talk to that too, because I just thought that tweet was awesome that you brought that up.
And I think, I mean, I'm always someone who would always crack jokes at inappropriate times. Because humor was what would get me through. I mean, I remember when my dad was dying and he was in the hospital and they had taken him off all the machines, and it was just that time period of waiting for him to cease. And instead of sitting around and being all sad and dark and grim, we started telling all of the hilarious stories, you know, of, oh, you remember that time when you ran outside naked to shoot a groundhog? You remember that time? You know, do you remember when he went and, you know, he was hunting this one thing and did, you know, do you remember when he ran over his own foot because he was working on his truck and blah, 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 you know, and that's, but and that doesn't mean that we were being unkind to his memory or anything like that. I mean, that was remembering these different facets of his life through those stories, through those moments that were very lighthearted, but that fully completed the tapestry of his life. Those were the things, those were like the little stars in the sky that we noticed, that we remembered, and that were going to be our most poignant memories of him. Not sad things, not depressing things, but sometimes those funny things. And that's what we clung to at those moments when he was leaving us, were just those silly moments. Those were the most important things for us at that time. And I think in all manners of art and creativity, it's not all grim, dark, and sadness and gloom and doom. I mean, those things exist, but my goodness, if it was like that constantly 100%, I don't think the world would exist right now. It's just, there's such a panoply of things. Every emotion exists and every emotion is important. And one is not more important or more literary or more lasting just because it's dark or it brings tears or something like that.
Yeah, I think comedic writing or acting generally isn't seen as being as worthy as things that are dramatic. But actually, comedy is really hard. It's very, very hard to pull it off. And if I think, if you think about all the famous books in the world, like Pride and Prejudice would be something that would be up there. Like people would talk about, being their favorite classical book or one of the first classical books they read. And I think a book like that's really stood the test of time because there is comedy in it, and there is humor, and some of the characters are very witty, and because I think all humanity kind of is drawn to that at some level, that you want to find humor and in those hard times. And so I think, see, if anyone recommends a book to me that is funny, I always read it because I know it will be good, because humor is notoriously difficult to get right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and it's it's part of writing stories as human rather than any one-dimensional thing, because all of these things exist in us at once, and so having the inclusion of them does not make a thing less human.
Yeah, and even if you think about, something I appreciated in Brightwash, Krystle, was that, it's grimdark, but there were so many moments that I laughed or smiled at the banter, or, this little girl who has absolutely no filter. I loved it so much because I have one of those. And so I was just, every time Stella was like, oh, like I feel it. And I loved that about it. And that was something that I think even Joe Byrne, actually, the Wistful Ascending author, posted on his Twitter this morning asking about why do people like grimdark when it's everything sad and dark and depressing all the time. And I was like, even in the books that I love that are very dark and there's a lot of suffering and a lot of horrible things that are happening, I still need and appreciate those moments of normalcy and that those moments of laughter within darker moments. And that's really what gives the story such a well-rounded feel, so that it's not just constantly feeling like it's just this oppressive negativity all the way through. Yeah. So
I'm laughing. I'm sorry. I have to say, I was explaining what grimdark was to my older kids one day, and I was trying to get it across to them. And basically, I kind of summed it up really when they're really trying to get into like how dark can they get. And I said, okay, that song that Batman sings in Lego Batman, where it's the darkness, no parents. It's like, it's that for an entire fantasy book. Like, that's what grimdark. I said, so, and then everything else will have a little bit more brightness to it. But that was how I explained what grimdark to some grimdark is. It's just this never-ending pummeling of darkness.
Yeah, and that's that's why I kind of steered a little bit more romance in the book, because earlier versions of it, I couldn't work on it anymore because it was like the darkness was so unrelenting that I was like, I can't do this for a whole series. This isn't gonna work for me. And so I pulled in more hope and more connection between people, and then suddenly, even though it's rough out there, I kind of convinced myself it wasn't that dark. But to me, if there's something to hope for, then it kind of, I don't know, it brings a different dimension to the darkness rather than just, like Quen said, that unrelenting slog through the mud.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes back to a little bit of escapism too. You know, when we're reading our books, we need to be reminded that like there are things sometimes that are hopeful and beautiful and that you can have. And that's one of the things I love about reading darker fantasy is that those moments of light shine through so much. But there are times when I'm not in the mood for it. Like I need something that is gonna just lift my spirits and make me laugh and just have a good, comfortable read. So for your book, Quen, did you talk kind of about how Miss Percy reflected some things that were personal experiences for you. Was it, I'm assuming, having not read it, that there's a lot of good Regency humor-esque in it. So how did you approach that? Because I'm seeing some comments in here about, which I think, Melissa, being funny in your books and your sense of humor not always working. There will be people that it works. Like everyone has very different styles of humor.
I wrote Miss Percy, and there is that kind of a Regency sense of humor. I had to, I saw that comment with the people dismiss Pratchett. Yeah, I was going to mention Pratchett and Douglas Adams, that, they're revered, but yet they're not like the top tier fantasy because they're humorous, but yet they still shine such a light on the human condition, sometimes greater than any other authors out there. But since there's that veneer of humor, they get dismissed. But no, with Miss Percy, I did try to present the humor in this kind of Regency fantasy of manners way. So, if it was, I went a little absurd with it. I was trying to explain it to my husband when I was writing it. And I was like, okay, it has all these little parentheticals, which are kind of like these inserted footnotes. And then I grew up living on things like Good Omens and Douglas Adams and stuff. So I thought, well, how can I take that vibe and then throw it in with Jane Austen? And will I screw this up? And I wrote it, and I'm thinking, I remember the whole time I was writing it thinking, this is just the weirdest little book, and no one else is going to like this except maybe 20 other people are all going to think this is this weird, quirky little thing that I do not know how I'm going to market, but I'm just going to go with my weird little jokes because it was me just kept letting my stupid sense of humor go. And apparently a lot of other people like my weird, stupid little sense of humor. I think that's the thing.
I remember you tweeting about it as you were writing it and stuff about how, nobody was gonna like this except you, and but you're gonna do it anyway because you were having such a hard time, and it was such an amazing thing to witness, and then now you're wrong. You're so wrong.
But I think that's the biggest thing about writing humor. The biggest advice I could give about writing humor is that I think also, as you said, if you find it funny, someone else will find it funny. I think as long as you're not being, offensive or, anything like that, I think go with it. The moment you hold back or try to shape it to what you think other people will like is when you're going to lose it. I think just go with it. Just throw yourself into it. Whatever that weird little thing is that you want to write, just do it, because I honestly think that's what we need more of in fantasy. I don't think we need this type of female character. I don't think I can pull off having a mother in fantasy, or I don't think I can pull off this odd humorous story. Or, we get so intent on writing something that we could pitch in a tweet as this crossed with this, this is my, and I think we worry so much about what is marketable. And the thing is that I don't think anyone knows what is marketable. I think Miss Percy proved that. No one knows what is marketable, what I mean. And if we're trying to write to what we think will be marketable, we've already missed the boat on that. So, just goodness gracious, just write what's in your heart and put it out there. I think readers will realize that. So write your weird little humorous stories about mothers having a bad time trying to have adventures, you know. Yes.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Krystle?
I was going to say that, you know, the marketable part is the human soul, you know, and you know the advice that just write it works for humor, but it works for all of the weird little quirky things that you do with mixing subgenres. And if you write from a place that's honest and open, I think that's the thing that's marketable. That's the thing that people respond to, and that's the thing that makes you memorable among, you know, the market, which is food, right? And so I think that's where we are really moving the needle lately, where people are kind of just fed up with trying to guess what the market wants. And they're just writing their hearts and souls, and that's the implosion that we're seeing, or the explosion that we're seeing in creative and new things and different human experience and different characters, and characters who are treated like people rather than empty tropes who may or may not be women.
Yeah, because I think that, I mean, honestly, the tropes go both ways. I think there's a lot of, you know, male archetypes that I'm like,
super empty.
Right, like, you know, this could definitely be a lot deeper, you know. I think it definitely is something that goes both ways, and it's something that I enjoy having alpha, beta readers, you know, female writers and male writers that can kind of watch for both of those things and make sure that I'm really putting my best effort into all of my characters. I was thinking too, Shauna, for you are writing someone who already existed, but then also putting your own. So I'm curious, as a historical fantasy writer, like how much are you pulling from her as she exists in history records versus how much of your own twist are you putting into either one of your protagonists?
Okay, so there's not a lot of historical documentation for Gormla, and there's two key documents really that discuss her in depth. But so I am basically following the historical timeline, and there's quite a lot of historical characters, but some of the characters in my novel have the mythological magic that existed in Irish mythology. So that's the fantasy part. And so obviously that is not documented. That's not in any of the historical records, but I have added that in. So I think the fact that there's not a lot of historical documentation actually helps me in a way, because I have the timeline, but I'm freer to create the characters. Because I know I'm a big fan of historical fiction. So if you were to move to a more modern period of Irish history or any sort of global history, you know, you would be inundated with records and sources and
also misinformation, I would think.
What's that, sorry?
And also misinformation, yes. I would think that you have to kind of battle against, because everybody thinks they know this thing. And so if you write against it, you have to either ignore it and hope that people won't be mad, or counter-educate them. So
yeah, so they're all issues when you're a historical fiction writer. I think the fact I'm really far back helps, because people don't know these characters, so I'm a bit freer to put my own spin on it. And then because Irish mythology is imbued in the story, I think people aren't maybe expecting me to be 100% accurate, and they forgive where I've deviated. Whereas I think if you were to say it was, you know, only historical fiction, people would expect more accuracy, or would question decisions more if you had decided to veer off course. So yeah, so it is fairly historically accurate in terms of the wars and the timelines and the main characters. But Gormla, I'm having fun with her. I'm not worrying too much about the records, and actually the records don't like her very much anyway. So
all the more fun.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask all three of you, as kind of a general wrap up, I wanted to ask all three of you to give out some advice too, because the show is called Imposter Syndrome for a reason. And I think it's hilarious that I'm pretty sure in every episode, no matter what topic we're focusing on, that is going to come up somewhere. And so one of the things that I really want to do with the series is make sure that, the people that are watching and rewatching after the fact are getting a lot of, hopefully being boosted, getting ideas. I love that Melissa said that she's been getting ideas from the episode. That's awesome. What advice do you guys have for not necessarily just new authors, but just for people who are writing books, and especially in the fantasy genre? And what kind of advice do you want to share with them here at the end? I know, Quen, you kind of gave some really good advice a minute ago, so I'm going to ask you for more. Shauna, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. I think writing is something that you should enjoy and take your time at. And, stories don't, it's sort of the anti-modern age thing to do, because modern life is so quick and so fast and everything's so easy and accessible. Writing is still not. Writing still takes a long time to do and a long time to perfect. And there aren't really any shortcuts. And so sometimes when I'm on Twitter and people are talking about writing and they're getting downhearted or dejected, they sort of had set themselves time goals. Like, so this time next year, I will have done this and I will have done this. And I always feel like saying to people, don't do that with writing. Like, don't set yourself time goals. Enjoy it, have fun. And, and that, I think that will kind of go into what, everyone else here has been saying, is that if you're taking your time and enjoying it, that's when I think you create something that's special. And that's when you will write something that other people will connect to. And I think whenever you put time pressure on yourself, that's when you'll start to do things that are more formulaic, or you'll start to do things that you think you should be doing. And I sort of do the opposite. There is no rush. There's, don't put all this pressure on yourself. Whenever I have friends who are artists and musicians, and they can create things so quickly and then they can put it out so quickly. And writing, you just have to understand it's just not like anything else. And to be kind to yourself. And I think, if you write something that you enjoy, other people will enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely kind of plus one to all of that, because I did it to myself. I put an impossible deadline on myself for a second book, and I thought way too hard about how I was going to market it, and what I was going to call it. It's much of this, it's not enough of that, and I didn't enjoy it. I was kind of miserable for a solid year, trying to meet all of these impossible finish lines that only existed because I told myself that they existed. And so, yeah, don't do that. That's my advice. And write the story that you want to read. Firstly, because you're going to have to read it about 1 million times, but also because that passion comes through. And so when you're doing things that are a little bit different because you're bringing a new spin to something, the unfamiliarity that you're creating by reinventing something will be kind of forgiven, because if the readers can feel how much you love it. And by loving it that much, you're inviting people to love it that much with you. And so if you are learning your strengths and you're leaning into them and you're really enjoying the story that you're going to tell, there's a good chance that other people are going to feel that, and they'll forgive you whatever parts that you've missed, you didn't meet their expectations, because that human connection is there, and that's why we come to stories.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it me now?
It is.
Sorry.
You
I think is
absolutely zero apologies necessary.
Yeah.
I think I have two pieces of advice that I've really been trying to adhere to myself, especially lately, that I think are universal and would help new writers or people who have been writing for decades. Number one is read, consume other media, and especially consume things that are not in the same genre and subgenre that you are writing. So, if you want to write a story that's like Aragon or something like that, then don't only read stories that are like that, or it's just going to come off like a carbon copy. You need to really push yourself, read some Agatha Christie, read some romance, read some different things, because the world of literature is huge. And I think if you confine yourself, you're really going to limit your own skills.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think another thing that I always try to remind myself is that don't worry if what you're writing seems similar to something that someone else is writing, because if you really do write your story with your heart and your passion in it, it is not going to sound like the version that someone else is writing. I wrote Miss Percy, and then there's also Scales and Sensibility by Stephanie Burgess, who is also a SPIFFO finalist. And I had this weird little quirk of nervousness when I saw that she was releasing her book within a few weeks of mine. And I thought, oh no, 2 Regency Dragon books. It's, people are going to think I'm copying her or something like that. But you could give the same exact idea to a dozen different authors, and they're going to come up with something completely different. No one's going to write the exact same thing. You could say, okay, write a murder mystery where there's 10 suspects and the murder weapon is a knife and it takes place in the 1920s and da-da-da. And every single story is going to be so completely different. So don't panic that, well, everybody's writing, retellings of fairy tales. I can't write my retelling of a fairy tale. Yes, you can, because it's your story. It's your retelling of that story. So that's what I've been trying to remind myself.
Yeah. I think something that I wanted to mention is don't be afraid to write in the midst of motherhood. For any mom writers that watch this episode, I think I've talked to a lot of moms who like, oh, I want to write a book someday, but they're in that, mom mantle kind of thing where I can't, or don't feel like I get guilty about putting time and effort into things that I love as an individual. And, I wrote Phased. I have pictures of me sitting at my kitchen table with children literally like running in the background, screaming. And I'm just, in the middle of it, writing my book. And it's totally possible. And don't be afraid to let your kids see you making art and doing something creative, because that's parenting too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely co-sign that. I started Brightwash when my youngest was about a baby, maybe a year old or so. And I think letting our children see us as mothers be more than mothers is a valuable thing to them. And of course, it's a valuable thing to us to let ourselves be more than mothers. And Shauna, I'm sure you can have a similar, because you also said you're a mother, although I think, and some of yours are about the same age as mine. So
yeah, very similar. Actually, I started kind of getting serious about writing after my second. And so I was writing before I had my third and then after I had my third baby. And all I did was, because I really wanted to get back into writing because it was something I had always done. And I started writing every other evening for 1 hour. So me and my husband took turns doing the bedtime routine. And that's how I got started. It was an hour and a half every other night, just when my husband was putting the kids to bed. And, you know, slowly but surely, you know, your story comes out. And I think sometimes when you're a mother, the reason why I hadn't already started writing was because I was like, but I need hours and hours of time, you know, to write. And that's not possible anymore. But you don't need hours and hours. You just need to be consistent. And just finding that hour, half an hour, but every day or every other day, and to commit to it. You know, you don't need to be writing nonstop. But that the thing is, in my mind initially, that was too slow, and that's why I said earlier about, you know, don't set yourself these timelines. Art takes time to do, and it takes time to learn how to write and to find the story that you want to write, because I've got novels that I've written that haven't been published and will never be published, and that's part of the process. So, yeah, it's just finding time.
Yeah, I know Melissa's a mom too and fantasy author, and yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people put it off so long, but there's always going to be things like, you know, whether you have kids or something else. Yeah, there's never a perfect time to honestly do like anything in life. So yeah. So yeah, I'm curious because Shauna, you said you have 3 boys and they're what ages?
12, 9, and 7.
Okay. And then Krystle, you have?
I have 4. The twins are 16 now. And then the littles aren't little anymore. They're 10 and about to turn 7.
And Quen, how many kids do you have?
I have 5, and they are, I'm going to get this right, 13.
It's a pop quiz.
11. She's about to turn 12, so I'm allowed to fudge on that one. 13, 11, 9, 6, and this one's 4.
I have 3 that are now 10, 7, and 5. See, I only have 3 and I still had to think about it. So yeah, I hope that yeah, for any moms watching this, especially, like, you can do this. But yeah, so for everyone, all of the links to these amazing ladies' websites are all in the description box below with their books. Go check them out, and feel free to leave comments under the video. But yeah, thank you guys so much for agreeing to take time out of your busy lives to hang out on Imposter Center. Appreciate it. And Krystle for the second time now. I was teasing her, she's in my face.
Not possible. It's a lot of fun.
So yeah, thank you guys so much for being on the show. And yeah, everybody go check out their books. I will certainly be reading both Quen and Shauna's books this year. I'm really excited to get to those. So
yeah, Shauna, you really sold me on yours.
I know, I'm so ready.
Well, thank you. Yes, I know I'm going to get to everyone's books. Krystle, I have got your book. I actually own it. And I've been hearing wonderful things about it. So yes, lots of books to read this year. And that is actually my New Year's resolution, is to find time to read a bit more.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. And thanks for everybody that stuck around with us in the comments. And we will see you guys in the next episode.